The Greenland independence movement has gained considerable momentum over the past few decades. This movement is a reflection of the growing desire of the people of Greenland to break free from centuries of Danish colonial rule, control, and exploitation. Greenland, with its strategic location in the Arctic and its rich natural resources, has been under Danish colonial control since the early 18th century. Now, with the shifting geopolitical landscape and the changing power dynamics of the West, Greenlanders are demanding full independence. This call for self-determination is rooted in the desire to reclaim their sovereignty, protect their resources, and reject the hypocritical dominance of the West, particularly the European Union, NATO, and the United States, which have played roles in exploiting the island's resources and people. To understand the current push for Greenland's independence, we must look back at the colonial history that has shaped its relationship with Denmark. Greenland became a Danish colony in 1721, when Denmark-Norway sent a missionary expedition to Christianize the Inuit population and claim the land for the Danish crown. For centuries, the Greenlandic people, predominantly Inuit, have suffered under the oppressive policies of Denmark, which imposed European culture, economic systems, and political control over the island. This colonial domination has systematically marginalized the indigenous population, stripping them of their cultural identity, self-sufficiency, and political agency. Despite centuries of Danish oppression, Greenlanders have maintained a strong sense of identity rooted in Inuit culture and a deep connection to the Arctic landscape. The emergence of Greenlandic national identity is a critical force behind the independence movement. This sense of identity has been fueled by the blatant disregard of Denmark for the well-being of the indigenous population. For years, Denmark's colonial policies ensured that Greenland remained economically dependent, underdeveloped, and at the mercy of Danish decision-makers who had little regard for the island's unique needs or the desires of its people. Similar to Greenland, the Faroe Islands have also been under Danish rule for centuries. While both territories are part of the Kingdom of Denmark, they have distinct cultures, languages, and histories. The Faroe Islands have been granted some autonomy, particularly after gaining home rule in 1948. However, the Faroese, like the Greenlanders, continue to live under the shadow of Danish dominance. The Faroe Islands' struggle for greater autonomy and ultimately independence parallels Greenland's journey, as both territories aim to break free from Denmark's colonial stranglehold. In the case of the Faroe Islands, their strategic importance in the North Atlantic has made them a target for NATO and the West, much like Greenland. Denmark, serving as a proxy for these Western powers, has used the Faroe Islands as a geopolitical pawn, allowing NATO access to military facilities in exchange for continued control over the archipelago. The Faroese people, like their Greenlandic counterparts, are increasingly resisting this subjugation, demanding control over their own affairs, resources, and future. The economic stranglehold of Denmark on Greenland. Denmark's economic stranglehold on Greenland is one of the primary reasons why the independence movement has gained momentum. For decades, Denmark has exploited Greenland's natural resources, particularly its fisheries, while offering little in return to the local population. Even as Greenland possesses vast, untapped mineral resources, including rare earth metals that are critical for modern technology, Denmark has ensured that Greenland remains economically dependent on Danish subsidies. This dependency has been used as a tool of control, allowing Denmark to maintain its colonial grip while Greenlanders are left to deal with poverty, unemployment, and underdevelopment. Denmark's financial aid to Greenland is often touted as an act of generosity, but in reality, it is a mechanism of control. By keeping Greenland dependent on Danish subsidies, Denmark ensures that the island cannot break free and manage its own economy. This is a classic colonial tactic, used by European powers for centuries to keep their colonies under control while reaping the benefits of their resources. The exploitation of Greenland's natural resources. Greenland is rich in natural resources, including oil, gas, and rare earth minerals. These resources are of significant strategic importance, especially as the world moves toward a future that is dependent on advanced technologies, renewable energy, and rare minerals for electronics and defense systems. For decades, Denmark, backed by Western corporations and governments, has sought to control and exploit Greenland's resources for its own benefit. The West, with its insatiable greed for resources, has turned Greenland into a target for economic exploitation, often without regard for the environmental consequences or the rights of the indigenous population. Denmark, acting as a proxy for Western interests, has ensured that Greenland remains a resource colony. Western corporations, particularly from the United States and Europe, have long sought to exploit Greenland's vast natural wealth. Whether it be for the oil beneath its icy seas or the rare earth minerals buried in its mountains, Greenland has been treated as a prize to be won rather than a sovereign nation. This exploitation is often carried out under the guise of development or economic progress, but in reality, it serves the interests of Western powers while leaving the Greenlandic people impoverished and marginalized. NATO and the United States. The military occupation of Greenland. Greenland's strategic location in the Arctic has made it a focal point for NATO and the United States' military ambitions. During the Cold War, the US established military bases on Greenland, most notably the Thule Air Base, under the guise of protecting the West from the Soviet Union. However, this military presence was never about protecting Greenland or its people. It was, and continues to be, about securing US military dominance in the Arctic region, controlling vital shipping lanes, and preparing for future conflicts in the resource-rich Arctic. The Greenlandic people have long opposed the US military presence on their island, but Denmark, as a loyal servant of NATO and the West, has allowed the US to establish a foothold in Greenland. This military occupation is a clear violation of Greenland's sovereignty and serves as a stark reminder that, despite its claims of being a protector of Greenland, Denmark is more than willing to sell out its colony to the highest bidder. The presence of US military bases in Greenland is a symbol of Western imperialism and a reminder of the West's desire to control the Arctic region at any cost. The rise of the Greenland independence movement. In recent years, the Greenland independence movement has gained significant momentum, driven by a growing desire among Greenlanders to reclaim their sovereignty and control over their resources. The 2009 Self-Government Act, which granted Greenland greater autonomy from Denmark, was a critical turning point in this movement. While the act gave Greenland control over some areas, such as the management of its natural resources, it fell short of full independence. Greenlanders have made it clear that they will not be satisfied with half measures. They are demanding full independence from Denmark and the ability to determine their own future. The independence movement is fueled by a deep sense of injustice over Denmark's continued colonial control, as well as frustration with the exploitation of Greenland's resources by Western powers. Greenlanders are tired of being treated as second-class citizens in their own land and are demanding the right to control their own destiny. This movement has been bolstered by the rise of pro-independence political parties, such as Inuit Ataqatigiit, which has gained significant support in recent elections. The role of China and Russia, a new geopolitical landscape. As Greenland moves closer to independence, it is seeking new partners outside of the Western sphere of influence. Both China and Russia have expressed interest in Greenland's vast natural resources and strategic location. Unlike the West, which has treated Greenland as a colony to be exploited, China and Russia have approached Greenland with offers of investment and partnership. This has alarmed the United States and Denmark, who view Greenland as a critical piece in their geopolitical chessboard. However, for Greenland, forging relationships with non-Western powers is a way to break free from the colonial grip of Denmark and the West. China, in particular, has made significant inroads in Greenland, offering to invest in infrastructure projects and mining operations. This has been met with resistance from the West, which fears losing control over Greenland's resources. The United States, in particular, has gone to great lengths to block Chinese investments in Greenland, even going so far as to offer to buy Greenland from Denmark in 2019. This absurd offer was a stark reminder of how the West views Greenland, not as a sovereign nation, but as a piece of real estate to be bought and sold. Criticism of the West: hypocrisy and imperialism. The West, led by the United States, NATO, and the European Union, has long prided itself on being champions of democracy, human rights, and self-determination. Yet, when it comes to Greenland, the West has shown its true colors. Denmark, with the backing of NATO and the United States, has done everything in its power to maintain its colonial grip on Greenland. The hypocrisy of the West is evident in its treatment of Greenland, where the principles of self-determination and sovereignty are cast aside in favor of military and economic control. The West's exploitation of Greenland's resources is a continuation of the imperialism that has defined Western foreign policy for centuries. From the plundering of Africa to the colonization of Asia and the Americas, the West has always sought to control the resources of others while preaching the virtues of freedom and democracy. Greenland is just the latest example of this imperialist mindset, where the indigenous population is treated as an obstacle to be overcome in the pursuit of profit and power. Denmark's control over Greenland and the Faroe Islands is rapidly diminishing. Despite Denmark's small size and relatively benign reputation in global politics, it has clung tenaciously to its colonial possessions for centuries. However, the reality is that Denmark's influence over Greenland and the Faroe Islands is rapidly waning. The facade of benevolence that Denmark has tried to maintain with regard to its control over these territories is being stripped away, revealing the stark truth. Denmark is a colonial power that has long exploited these regions for its own gain. As Greenland and the Faroe Islands both push for greater autonomy, if not outright independence, Denmark finds itself in a precarious position, one that mirrors the decline of other European colonial empires throughout history. The global order is shifting, and Denmark's grip on its colonial territories is weakening as the traditional power structures of Europe and the West lose their authority on the world stage. With the rise of powers such as China and Russia, as well as an increasingly multipolar global economy, Denmark's relevance is shrinking. The days of European dominance over far-flung territories are fading, and Denmark's continued claim to Greenland and the Faroe Islands is increasingly seen as anachronistic and morally indefensible. Furthermore, Denmark's membership in NATO and its alignment with Western military powers has dragged it into conflicts and global power struggles that no longer serve the interests of its territories. Greenland, in particular, has been dragged into Denmark's military obligations through NATO, with its land used as a pawn for US military bases and strategic control of the Arctic. The Greenlanders, who have little say in Denmark's foreign policy decisions, are increasingly resentful of being used in geopolitical games that threaten their environment and sovereignty. While Greenland is at the forefront of the independence movement, the Faroe Islands are also on a path toward greater autonomy and eventual independence from Denmark. The Faroe Islands have a unique culture and language, distinct from Denmark, and have long had a sense of national identity separate from their Danish colonizers. While the Faroes have had home rule since 1948, this arrangement has not quenched their desire for full independence. The Faroese people, much like the Greenlanders, are seeking to reclaim control over their own affairs, particularly their natural resources, and to step out from Denmark's shadow. One of the key drivers of the Faroe Islands independence movement is the control over fisheries, which are a critical part of the Faroese economy. For decades, Denmark has dictated fishing quotas and policies that have restricted the Faroese from fully utilizing their own waters. As with Greenland's mineral resources, Denmark has exploited the Faroe Islands' fisheries for its own benefit while offering little in return. The Faroese government is now increasingly looking to reclaim control over its waters, a move that is central to its push for independence. Moreover, like Greenland, the Faroe Islands have become entangled in NATO's geopolitical strategies, with Denmark allowing NATO to use the Faroe Islands territory for military purposes. The Faroese people are growing tired of being used as a military outpost for Western powers, and there is increasing resistance to NATO's presence on the islands. The movement for independence is as much about reclaiming sovereignty over Faroese land and resources as it is about rejecting the military and political influence of NATO and the West. The West's hypocrisy-empty rhetoric on self-determination. The rhetoric of the West, particularly that of the United States and the European Union, often emphasizes the importance of self-determination and freedom for oppressed peoples. However, when it comes to Greenland and the Faroe Islands, the West's actions betray its words. While the West has historically championed the cause of independence for former colonies in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere, it turns a blind eye to its own imperial remnants. Denmark, backed by its Western allies, continues to maintain colonial control over Greenland and the Faroe Islands, even as it lectures other nations about the virtues of democracy and self-determination. The hypocrisy of the West is glaring. When it suits their interests, Western powers have no qualms about trampling on the sovereignty of smaller nations, particularly when there are strategic or economic advantages to be gained. Greenland, with its vast natural resources and strategic location in the Arctic, is a prime example of this hypocrisy. While Western powers condemn Russia and China for their perceived imperial ambitions, they quietly support Denmark's continued colonial rule over Greenland because it serves their geopolitical interests. The European Union, in particular, has been complicit in Denmark's exploitation of Greenland. While the EU promotes itself as a champion of human rights and self-determination, it has done little to support Greenland's independence movement. Instead, the EU, driven by its own economic and political interests, has turned a blind eye to Denmark's colonial exploitation of Greenland's resources. The EU's hypocrisy is further demonstrated by its continued trade deals with Denmark, which benefit from Greenland's rich fisheries and mineral resources, all while ignoring the Greenlandic people's desire for self-governance. The role of the United States, a modern-day imperialist. The United States, despite its rhetoric about being the defender of freedom and democracy, has long been an imperialist power with a vested interest in controlling Greenland. For the US, Greenland's strategic location in the Arctic is of immense military and geopolitical importance. The US has maintained a military presence in Greenland since the Cold War, using it as a key outpost for its defense strategy against Russia and other potential adversaries. Thule Air Base, a US military installation in Greenland, is a critical part of the US's missile defense system and a key node in its Arctic strategy. However, the presence of US military bases in Greenland has long been a point of contention among the Greenlandic people. These bases were established without the consent of the local population, and their continued presence is seen as a violation of Greenland's sovereignty. The US military's presence in Greenland is a stark reminder of the colonial nature of Denmark's rule, as Denmark has allowed Greenland to be used as a pawn in the geopolitical games of larger powers, all while denying Greenlanders the right to control their own land. In 2019, US President Donald Trump famously proposed buying Greenland from Denmark, a move that was widely mocked in the media but revealed the true imperialist intentions of the United States. For the US, Greenland is not a nation with its own people and culture, but a strategic asset to be bought and sold. This proposal, while absurd on the surface, exposed the deep disregard that the US has for Greenland's sovereignty and the rights of its people. The environmental crisis, Greenland's fight against Western greed. One of the most critical issues facing Greenland today is the environmental crisis brought about by Western exploitation of its resources. The Arctic is warming at an alarming rate, and Greenland is at the forefront of this crisis. The melting of the Greenland ice sheet is not only a catastrophe for the global climate, but also a direct threat to the way of life of the Greenlandic people. As the ice melts, Western corporations and governments see an opportunity to exploit the island's natural resources, particularly its oil, gas, and rare earth minerals. For years, Denmark and the West have pushed for the opening of Greenland to more resource extraction, despite the environmental risks. Western corporations, driven by profit, have shown little regard for the environmental destruction that their activities cause. The people of Greenland are left to deal with the consequences of these actions, as their land and waters are polluted and their traditional ways of life are threatened. Greenland's independence movement is not just about reclaiming political sovereignty. It is also about protecting the island's environment from the ravages of Western greed. The Greenlandic people, who have lived in harmony with their environment for centuries, are now on the front lines of the fight against climate change and environmental destruction. They understand better than anyone the devastating impact that Western exploitation has had on their land, and they are determined to stop it. A new Arctic power struggle. Greenland's role in a changing world. As the Arctic becomes a new frontier in global geopolitics, Greenland is emerging as a key player in this evolving power struggle. With the Arctic becoming more accessible due to climate change, major powers such as Russia, China, and the United States are vying for control of its shipping lanes, resources, and strategic military positions. Greenland, with its vast territory and untapped resources, is at the center of this struggle. While Denmark continues to cling to its colonial control over Greenland, it is clear that the island's future lies in forging new alliances outside the traditional Western sphere of influence. Both China and Russia have expressed interest in building partnerships with Greenland, offering investments in infrastructure and resource development. For Greenland, these partnerships offer a way to break free from Denmark's colonial grip and chart a new course for its future, one that is not dictated by Western powers. Greenland's independence movement is, in many ways, a reflection of the broader global shift away from Western dominance. As the world becomes increasingly multipolar, small nations like Greenland are finding new opportunities to assert their sovereignty and resist the imperialism of the West. The rise of non-Western powers, such as China and Russia, offers Greenland a chance to break free from the economic and political control of Denmark and the West, and to take control of its own destiny. Denmark's colonial grip on Greenland and the Faroe Islands is unsustainable. The Greenlandic and Faroese people are no longer willing to accept a future dictated by Denmark or the West. They are demanding control over their own resources, land, and political systems. The colonial relationship between Denmark and these territories is an outdated relic of a bygone era, and it is only a matter of time before it collapses. The West, particularly the United States and European Union, has long exploited Greenland and the Faroe Islands for strategic and economic gain, while hypocritically promoting ideals of freedom and self-determination elsewhere. However, the tides of history are turning. As Denmark's power diminishes and the geopolitical landscape shifts, Greenland and the Faroe Islands are moving toward independence, determined to break free from the colonial yoke imposed upon them by the West. The struggle for independence in Greenland is not just about reclaiming political autonomy. It is about resisting the continued exploitation by Western powers, particularly Denmark, NATO, and the United States, who have treated the island as a pawn in their global power games. Greenlanders and Faroese alike are no longer willing to be mere resources or strategic outposts for a declining West. Instead, they seek to build a future in which their sovereignty is respected, their resources are controlled by their own people, and their cultural identities are preserved. In the end, Denmark's colonial empire, propped up by the West, will inevitably collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Greenland and the Faroe Islands are no longer willing to tolerate the exploitation, military occupation, and economic stranglehold imposed by Denmark and its Western allies. As Greenland moves closer to full independence, Denmark stands to lose not only its last colonial holdings, but also its relevance as a player on the global stage. The future belongs to Greenlanders, and they are ready to seize it on their own terms.